Hi everybody, welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Well, it is late in the winter. We are all anticipating spring, and some of the produce that we have kept over from last summer in our root cellars, in our cool basements, it's that time of year where some of them kind of get a little bit iffy. One of those things is onions. Now, we did not grow very many onions last year because number one, we just aren't very good at it. Number two, they don't store well here at all. So we don't have onions in our root cellar or cool basement that are getting soft and yucky because we're completely out. But when I do have an excess of onions, I really enjoy freeze drying them. I love them so much that now that I'm out of them, I'm missing them tremendously. Now I use freeze dried onions in a lot of scrambled eggs, casseroles, and there's one casserole, a cheesy potato casserole that uses O'Brien potato mix, which is potatoes, green peppers, red peppers, and onions. I use freeze-dried onions and freeze-dried peppers with my potatoes to make that cheesy potato casserole, and it's fantastic. So I love to have freeze-dried onions on hand, but I'm out. So I decided that in one of our trips to Costco, I would stock up on onions, not only to use fresh in the house, but also to do some freeze drying. So today I'm going to be freeze drying onions with you, going through that process. And at the end, when they're all finished, I'm also going to use some of them to turn into onion powder that I can use as one of my seasonings here in the kitchen. Now in the past when I had extra onions, I would dice them up, put them in freezer bags and put them in the freezer. And it was okay, I was able to use them, but they kind of froze in like this one gigantic like ice cube full of diced onions, and that made it difficult to use. Also, for the first couple of months after putting them in the freezer, my freezer kind of smelled like onions, and then I was worried that that smell would permeate into things else that I was trying to use from the freezer, and it just kind of was bothering me. So when I discovered freeze drying and we got a freeze dryer, preserving onions through freeze drying was just a whole new wonderful experience. A couple of really nice things about using a freeze dryer is that the products that you freeze dry are shelf stable for a much longer amount of time than if you had them in the freezer getting freezer burned, or if you dehydrated them. Dehydrated onions and other things don't last as long as freeze-dried items because more of the moisture is taken out when you freeze dry than when you dehydrate. Now, I dehydrated onions forever and ever too, and I did really enjoy that, but the freeze dryer allows me to have them be shelf stable, you guys, for up to 20 years in some cases. Hopefully it will never take me that long to go through my onions, but it does give me a sense of security about the onions that I do have preserved, that they will still be good even beyond a couple of years. And hey, if one year we have a bumper crop of onions or, you know, some other vegetable, knowing that I have those saved up for the future, hey, we could be eating some of our freeze-dried stuff into retirement. And that security really makes us feel good. So I'm going to go ahead and start preparing these onions for the freeze dryer. And as I'm doing that, I will go ahead and share with you some of the tricks that I have learned along the way. Now the freeze dryer that we have is from Harvest Right, and it is the medium-sized freeze dryer. It has 4 shelves inside, and here are, you know, they're all stacked together, but these are the 4 shelves I'm going to be filling to put into the freeze dryer. Now, some people like to use like silicone liners on the bottom of their trays, but I don't really find it necessary most of the time, and things, you know, don't get stuck for me. But if you like those silicone tray liners, go ahead and use those. Now, we're gonna prepare these onions. It's really very simple. We're just gonna dice them. And I am going to cut the top and the bottom off of each of these. I'm gonna peel the skin and, you know, possibly the first layer depending on the onion. Now, sometimes when I prepare onions like this on videos, I get some criticism because I waste some of the onion parts. And I just want to assure you that I actually save all of these pieces. I put them in freezer bags and I put it in the freezer for when I make broth. Every time I make a whole chicken, I then use the leftovers and the carcass, the skin, and I add some water to my crock pot, throw in some of these onion ends and some of the ends of pieces of celery to make my broth. So I'm not wasting anything. I'm going to slice these half circles into rings. And then I know that I could probably just quickly dice these into little pieces, but I really like the uniformity of using a Vidalia vegetable chopper. Let me show you. If you've watched many of my cooking videos and a lot of my preserving videos, you'll see that I use this Vidalia Chop Wizard, and I got this off of Amazon, and I think we have one similar in our Amazon shop if you want to take a look. But it comes with two different like blade sizes inside of it. I'm using the larger blade. I don't know if you can even see that, but it cuts it into uniform little squares. Visually it looks really nice, but also I find that this shape and thickness and size does really well for freeze drying in the freeze dryer. Okay, I'm gonna chop these up. Okay, that onion is done. I'm gonna keep working on these onions, start filling trays. When we're all finished, then we will load the freeze dryer. Now that my chop wizard is full, I'm just going to open it up and empty it onto one of the freeze dryer trays here. One round does not quite fill up this freeze dryer. I'm guessing 1.5 or 2 rounds from the chopper will fill up each tray. So I'm just going to keep going. Okay, well that went by pretty quickly. You can see I have a whole bowl of these ends and skins that I'll use to make broth later on another day. I did fill all 4 of these trays with the diced onions. They're pretty full too. They're not a really light layer. They're quite a nice layer of diced onions. I'm excited to get those in the freeze dryer. So I'm gonna take these over to the freeze dryer, pop them in, and we'll get that started. Okay, so this is our freeze dryer. We have it in our mudroom / laundry room. And it has been working really well for us in here. When we first got our freeze dryer, we had it in an outbuilding. It wasn't quite as convenient, and we did get a little bit worried about running it in the extreme cold and extreme warm, although it always did fine for us. Let me grab the other trays. Now I've already turned the freeze dryer on so it can like load and initialize and everything. So I've loaded them in here, and now I just need to shut the door and lock it and press start. I'm gonna wait because it makes noise and I don't want it to interfere with the audio. So one of the major questions that we get when we freeze dry things that are very fragrant like onions is like, does the smell of onions stay inside the freeze dryer? And if you're freeze drying onions with something else, does it make the something else taste or smell like onions? I have not had that experience. When the onions are finished and I take them out and I package them and everything, as long as I leave the door open for a time to kind of air out, we don't have any residual smell of onion. What I can tell you though is that when we had this in our outbuilding, we ran the drain line into a bucket and collected the drain water into a bucket. And I did notice that the liquid had the odor of the onions. You know, that didn't really matter to me because every time I would just throw it out, you know, dump it into the grass. And it's not an issue for us in here because our drain line just empties into our sink and it goes down the drain. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is I think all of that smell ends up in the water, and so you don't have to worry about it staying in your freeze dryer or sticking to the other food that you have if you don't freeze dry just all onions at one time. Okay, the Harvest Right freeze dryers are super easy. They're pretty much set it and forget it. I'm just gonna press start, and I know that you can't see this, our camera makes this all kind of weird. I'm just gonna press start. And it takes care of everything on its own. It used to ask you if you are putting frozen foods in here or non-frozen foods, and they've changed their software, and now it can tell on its own whether or not you've put frozen or non-frozen foods in here. Obviously mine are non-frozen, so it's gonna go through the freezing process first and then freeze dry everything. This is gonna take at least 24 hours. So when it is finished, we'll come back, I'll unload it, show you what it looks like, package it up, and then I'm gonna turn some of these into onion powder. Well, it's taken about a day and a half for the freeze dryer to get done with the onions. They are completely done, and I have pressed the warm trays button so that the inside of this will warm up and warm the trays up. Otherwise, the trays are like 15 degrees because it keeps everything frozen in here until you're ready to take it out. So I have already pressed the warm trays button. Everything inside of here is warm enough for me to open up and take the trays out so we can take a look at and package up these diced onions. I just released the vacuum pressure from inside of here so that I can open up this door. That's what that noise was. Now I can open these up. I'm gonna take all the trays out and take them into the kitchen so we can take a look at them. I have all 4 trays out, sitting on the counter side by side. I want to get a close-up of this so you can just see them. They're exactly the same size and shape they were before, but they are just completely dry and crunchy. I bet you can hear that. Now I can tell that these are completely dry. Number one, because they're so crunchy and lightweight, but also they're not cold anymore like if they would be like fresh and raw in the freezer. They'd still be a tiny bit cold. You can buy a moisture meter that you can insert into your foods when you're done to make sure that there's no moisture in them. I do recommend that. But for these types of things, I don't feel like I need to use a moisture meter. I can tell pretty easily that they're dry. Now there are a couple ways that you can store freeze-dried foods, and if you're going to be storing them for a long time, I highly recommend using Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers in them. I do not plan to use these for long-term storage. I plan to use these up within a couple of months. So I'm actually gonna be storing them in jars, and I'm gonna store them in quart-sized jars, small enough so that if I open them a few times in between uses, I'm not worried about a lot of moisture or humidity getting into here and rehydrating them and making them spoil, but large enough that I don't have to use so many little bitty jars and worry about dishes and storage and that kind of thing. So I'm gonna start off today by putting a lot of these in quart-sized jars. So normally when I package things up from these trays, I use one of these big funnels. You can find these on Amazon. And that helps when I'm pouring things from the tray into my packaging. You know, I don't make a giant mess all over the counter and stuff. This kind of contains that mess a little bit and puts it right into whatever I need it to go into. However, these regular mouth jars, because I don't have any wide mouth jars in the house and I don't feel like going to get any more, these regular mouth jars, it doesn't fit into. So I'm gonna do something that looks really ridiculous, but it works. I'm gonna use a regular canning funnel with this big funnel on top of it. Yes, it looks ridiculous. Yes, it's probably gonna be a little bit cumbersome to work with, but that's just the way it's gonna work today. Okay, let's see if we can do this without making a giant mess. So I just take this tray, and they're really nice and loose and fluffy. Nothing is stuck on the bottom. And I'm just going to guide these into the jar. Just like that. A little too many in there, so I'm just gonna dump some out. Next jar. So one tray made about 1.5 quarts full. Remember, I am gonna keep out some to make some onion powder, but I'm just gonna keep filling these up until I have about half of a tray left. Okay, the next thing I'm gonna do, in order to seal these so they don't rehydrate in here, I am going to use a regular canning lid. These are actually gonna be reused from a separate canning session. This is a way to reuse your canning lids. So I'm gonna use a used canning lid here, and I'm going to use a rechargeable handheld vacuum sealer along with one of the vacuum seal jar attachments that you can buy separately from your vacuum sealer. So I'm gonna put the top on here, the lid, put the vacuum seal attachment top on here, and then this handheld vacuum sealer just goes right on top of there. You just hold it on top of there, press down, press the button, and you wait about 10 or 20 seconds, and then you turn it off. Remove it and take this attachment lid off, and it is vacuum sealed in there, okay? I do put a ring on top of here and twist it tight just to help make sure that seal stays in place, but it is very handy. I don't have to drag out my vacuum sealer and the cords and all the tubes that go to this. This is just super handy for me. Now we did get both of these through Amazon, and I'll make sure to look through our order history and try to put this in our Amazon shop. And these two, these come in regular and wide mouth. We have both, and this works with both of them. Okay, so that is how I'm gonna keep these sealed nicely until I use them. Okay, these are all done and ready to be put away. The last thing I'm gonna mention about this is that I am not going to use oxygen absorbers in these. You definitely can, but because I plan to keep these completely sealed up until I'm ready to start using them, and it's not gonna take me very long to get through all of these, I don't feel like I need to put an oxygen absorber in there and, you know, spend the money to use those. Those are kind of precious. They're not that expensive, I just feel like they're precious. Anyway, so these are ready to be put away. Let's quickly grind up the rest of these. I've got about 1/2 of a tray into some onion powder and package these up. Okay, so I've brought out my blender. This is a Vitamix. It should work pretty well to do the job that we're asking it to do. I'm just gonna put the rest of these onions in here. Guess I should have saved out my funnel. Put my top on here, and we're just gonna get blending these up. Okay, I let the dust settle a little bit because when I peeked in before, it went poof, and there was like onion powder everywhere. So let me just peek again. You guys, it did really well. It is very fine powder. Let me show you. It did a really great job. Now it's kind of hard for me to judge volume. I don't know if it's gonna be more than a jelly jar or less. I'm gonna play it safe and put it in a pint jar. I'm using a funnel here. Perfect. homemade onion powder. You guys, this is great. If you guys have onions that are in your root cellar or basement or a cold closet or something from last year that are getting yucky, or if you just bought a bunch at the store and they're starting to go bad, it's not too late. You can preserve them. You can dice them up and freeze dry them into just freeze-dried diced onions, or you can make your own onion powder. It's not too late to do that. So think about those kinds of things. In my case, I was missing my freeze-dried onions and went to Costco, loaded up on some of their onions at a good deal, and replenished my stock. You guys, if this kind of thing is exciting to you, or if you enjoy preserving and maybe in a new way, I suggest checking out freeze drying. Harvest Right has the best freeze dryers on the market for, small homes like this. So not commercial freeze dryers, they're just personal freeze dryers. Not only does it help you preserve your harvest from the summer, but things throughout the year. Also, I do a lot of freeze drying of leftovers so that nothing goes to waste. Broth, you can turn into your own homemade broth powder. It really is amazing, and there are so many options to do with a freeze dryer. If you're thinking about it maybe for the next harvest season or just to help nothing go to waste in your home, check them out. There is a link to the Harvest Right freeze dryer website in the description of this video. You guys, I'm so glad that you came by today to join me preserving in the middle of winter, not in the summer during crazy harvest season. If you are enjoying our videos, make sure that you're subscribed to our channel, and remember that the best way you can help us here on the homestead is just to share our videos on your social media. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care and God bless.